once was. To get on the internet, you need to connect to MSFT guest is the SSID. Once you connect to it, if you're not prompted with a web page, you need to go to http://connect.microsoft.com, which is written on the board back there. It'll ask you, how do you want to log in? And you need to pick event code. And that bottom line, MS Event 49OV, is the event code, in case you need to go ahead and connect up. So, a bit more complicated than it once was. The second sponsor that we have for this event is Tech Systems, who has provided all the pizza you're eating and everything else. And we have Lauren here from Tech Systems. Do you want to tell them about what you guys do? Yeah, please do.
Like you said, my name is Lauren, and I'm with Tech Systems out at our Bellevue office, which is one of 3 in the greater Seattle area. In case you are hearing of Tech Systems for the first time, we are the nation's leading IT staffing and services company. So we are actually a preferred vendor for Microsoft, have about 400 contractors out here right now, but also support a number of other enterprise level companies as well as a number of small to mid. So if you are looking for your next role, we have a lot of openings actually in the .NET development space, full stack, front end, back end. So come talk to me. And then also, if you are hiring for your team, if you are in a hiring capacity and want to learn more about what Tech Systems does, I can connect you with the right person. I will not be able to be here for the whole event, but in case you want to get in touch with me, I'll leave a stack of cards in the back too. So feel free to reach out then. So,
and you'll be back there until about 7:20 or so,
like
like that?
7:30.
So you can grab her if you want in person.
Yeah, please
cool.
do. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. We have a few other sponsors that occasionally have free giveaways that they give us. I think the gentleman that actually takes care of all these is not here tonight, so we'll say thank you, but we don't actually have any of them to give away tonight. Typically then we talk a little bit about a few community events. Does anybody know of any events coming up in the next month, a month and a half? Yeah, go for it.
Say something about Code Camp?
Yeah, please do. It's not in a month or a month and a half, but we still need to get going on it.
That's okay. We'll mention every time until September, because that's when it's happening. It's September 9th?
September 9th. September
9th in Seattle University. That's a one-day conference. Free food, free drinks, free breakfast. About 40, 50 sessions. Last year we had about 250 people. Hoping to have more this year. So it's going to be a good event. It's free again. And what we need is help from people. For you guys to help us out with the website on the day of the event. And I think the website and the day off is probably the most important, but the other thing we need is sponsorship. So if you work for a company or know somebody who can help us sponsor, like to pay for the food and drinks and other stuff that goes along with it, that would be great. Just contact me or Chris. Sponsorship is critical to make it free. Otherwise, we'll have to charge, which we don't want to do. So please talk to your boss, talk to your managers, see if we can get that going. And if you want to help out with the website, contact me on Meetup. And my name is Slobo or Chris. And then we can work on the website, which is on GitHub right now. And we have already a couple people helping us out. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Any other events folks know about? Yeah, go for it. Devin.
Is there a 2017 launch thing?
Yes. April. We announced it on the list here. But I believe we're partnering up with the Seattle Web Development Group, if I remember right. I think it's April 20th. There's an announcement actually on the Meetup board. So if you go to our Meetup group and look on the board, you should see all the details about where it is and where you can go sign up for that. We have, I'm going to get his last name wrong, James Montemagno, I believe, is going to do a demo of ES 2017 and a bunch around the Xamarin, new Xamarin functionality that's actually in ES 2017. So that should be real interesting. Other stuff. Thanks for reminding me about that. I forgot about that. Nope. Anybody out here looking for a new job? Looking for a gig? Please. What are you looking for?
Oh, sorry.
Red chicken mid-pizza.
Mid-pizza. Full stack, web, ASP.NET, MVC, web API, been doing C# since 04, basically.
Okay. So there's a gentleman there. Way in the back. Yes. For which? ASP.NET position, you said? Okay, cool. So you can talk to that gentleman there. Anybody else? Yes?
Howdy everyone. My name is Darren. I've been talking for about 4 years. I made C#. I do C++ on the side. I actually come to with Cortex. currently, and I have a really cool one for a battle side project, but looking for a job if anybody wants to give me some of
Excellent. Anybody else? No? Anybody looking to hire folks? It's usually one or two.
That's what I do.
Yeah, that's what you do. We already know about
I
you.
better be.
Excellent.
So actually, yeah, as far as the gentleman who just spoke up, we have 6 openings with Alaska Airlines. They're looking for senior full stack developers. So at the baseline, really strong ASP.NET MVC. Preferably a little stronger in the front end, but they're flexible because they understand. I don't know if you're familiar with Alaska's development environment. They're really big on mob programming and pair programming. They do it about 80% of the time. So as long as you have that really strong .NET background and are comfortable in that environment, these top 6 openings, this will be long-term contracts and converted for full time in the last year. So
Excellent. Cool.
Employees fight for free.
Employees buy for free.
I just wish they weren't quite so far from Edmonds.
Yeah. Anybody else? No? Okay. Yep, there we go. I had a slide in here. I forgot all about it. Seattle Web App Developers Group. It's going to be at Adobe Systems. We're holding it April 20th, 6 p.m. It's right in Fremont, if you're familiar, where kind of Northeast 34th is, kind of where Google and Adobe and all those guys are to below. So go ahead and you can find the Seattle Web App Developers Group and sign up at their meetup site. I'm always looking for speakers. Right now I'm booking for July and August. We're full up until then. The offer I like to make folks is one of 2 things. Either if you've got a topic that you're very interested in and you want me to go and try and find a speaker for it, please email me at chris@kinsman.net with the topic, and I'll go ahead and try and find a speaker that can potentially cover that topic. I'm working on somebody to do the cognitive toolkit right now. I haven't nailed down a speaker. And also some Azure machine learning stuff. Neither of those I've nailed down. I'm still looking for speakers on those. But other than that, the other opportunity is if you just have seen someone that's a great speaker and you think they'd be a great person to present at this event on any topic, also just send me their name. I'll figure out what their email address is and I'll follow up with them and chase them down and see if I can't get them out here to speak. I love the ideas that various folks have. Frequently we get together afterwards at the boardwalk. The guy that usually takes us over here is not here tonight. Yes, Devin?
I'll do it tonight.
You'll take folks over there tonight? Okay, cool. So the boardwalk is just a bar over kind of across the street, across 520, over on the Microsoft Commons. Folks typically get together afterwards, have a few drinks, etc., talk about the meetup or anything else you guys want to discuss. So circle up around Devin, and you guys can head on over there afterwards. Our next meeting is May 2nd. We're going to have a gentleman from Las Vegas, his name's Joe Mayo, come up and talk about bot framework and tactics around building bots with the bot framework, which should be real interesting. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Darrel here to tell us about Azure API Management.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can do this slide transition without too much pain. There we go. Okay, I'm going to turn my mic on. I don't think I need it, but so if I'm deafening people in the back, let me know because oh, that's going to be weird. You don't need me that loud. Okay. So yes, Microsoft managing change with Azure API Management. Before we get into that, I just want to tell a little bit about who I am. It will give you a frame of reference when you hear my opinions on things. I'm fairly new here at Microsoft. I've been working here for about a year as a full-time employee. Most of my career was spent building line of business type applications for small manufacturing companies. Spent probably the last 10 years figuring out how to build distributed HTTP APIs and systems around HTTP APIs, doing all kinds of hypermedia and web API type stuff. I did a few years as a developer evangelist, advocate, whatever you want to call them, and that's probably where I picked up this kind of addiction to doing talks. I'm actually a developer now, so I really don't need to come to these, but I do enjoy doing these talks. It gives you a chance to dig into a subject in depth and try and present it and see whether you actually know what you're talking about. So I'm now a developer on the API management team. They are an awesome group of folks. I don't actually live here. I live in Montreal, so I work remotely, but I get to come out and spend a week with them every now and again. Also, Microsoft, I'm involved in some of the review boards, the Office Review Board, the Azure API Review Board, the One API Council, and externally I'm on the Open API working group. All this to say, I have opinions about APIs. So if you have questions anywhere through these talks, I'm happy to share opinions. I will be talking about opinions about how to manage change in API management. Some of those will correlate with the team members' opinions on how the product is supposed to work. Some won't. We're a smart bunch of people. Sometimes they don't agree with me, surprisingly. So this is kind of our stock photo or slide that talks about API management and the various components. I'm not going to do the full dog and pony show on it, but I wanted to just basically highlight the three main aspects of the API management product. The first being that we have a developer portal, a place where developers come to learn about the APIs that we have, to try them out, to use them. We have the gateway, where traffic actually passes through and allows us to do the manipulation, the transformation and analytics. And then we have a component in the Azure portal. And you'll see these pieces in action in this demo. You can connect them to a backend. The backend can be hosted anywhere and developed using any technology as long as it's HTTP. This is kind of the slide that says, this is what we do. This is the value that we bring as a product. Starting from left, abstraction. We are a layer between the client and the server. You know how they say in software, the way to solve any problem is to add a layer of indirection? Well, we are that layer of indirection. We allow you to decouple the front end and the back end and make changes. You can take old systems that are horrible and need fixing and put us as a facade in front of them and clean them up. You can have systems with 10 different authentication mechanisms and make it consistent, have one, and you can optimize those horrible path structures that you had and rewrite them to nice, pretty path structures as the messages pass from front end to back end. We act as a piece of traditional HP middleware, so we can do security up front so that requests don't even reach that back end if you don't have the appropriate authentication. We can do throttling and quota management to protect your backend systems from either negligent requests or malicious requests. And we have a caching layer that's also available in geo-distributed caching layer also, again, for improved performance. We act as a monitoring, because all the traffic is going through us, we might as well keep track of what it is, what operations are being used, what APIs are being called, who's calling them, how often, how quick are the responses. All that information we can gather to understand the usage of your APIs, the health, and as we have all that usage data, you can drive monetization solutions with it. And last but not least at all, we provide services to the end developer. We allow developers to discover those APIs, to get documentation about the APIs, and make it quicker for them to get on board. Now, that is a large amount of stuff. We are a broad product that does lots of things. I can't dig deep into all of these features. So what I want to do is kind of give you an overview of the product, but focusing on change as one of the primary aspects. So you'll see how the product works, but as I go through the product, we'll talk about how this impacts change. And that's primarily because we're actually working at the moment on a feature that was going to help customers manage change within APIs. And we'll talk a little bit about what that function is going to bring to you. So that's not to say all the other stuff isn't really cool. There's some awesome stuff there. And we have three best aka.ms URLs. APIM Rocks is our marketing site. APIM Docs is our docs site. And APIM Roadmap is a Trello board. You can go and see this is what we're working on, you can vote on it, you can comment on it, you can tell us that we shouldn't be working on that and we should be working on something else. And that's all accessible to learn everything there is to know about all the other parts of API management. So, before we start discussing how to manage change, I'd like to try and sort of set a tone here about change. Historically, as software developers, we have a lot of pent-up fear about change. That, oh no, don't change that, it's going to break. Don't do that. Oh no, they just updated this, what's going to break now? And it's unfortunate, and it's because we've had some bad experiences in the past with certain things, but the thing is, change is actually mostly a good thing. If nobody's using your API, you probably don't need to change it. Change means somebody's asking for a new feature. They're asking you to enhance something. They're asking you to maybe correct something. But at least that means they're trying to use your software and they would like to use your software. So change isn't a bad thing, and we need good ways of handling it because we want to do more of it. Because it means more people are going to start using our product. And the I can never say the word the contrary point is that assuming that something will never change is a really bad idea, because it sends you down a path where you're going to find out later it did change, and it's going to hurt you further down the road. Sometimes it's fairly easy up front to make that little extra investment that says, if that property's not there in the future, don't crash out on me. There's lots of little things that we can do if we don't assume that it'll never change. So, to dig a little bit deeper into the problems that we've had in the past with change, one of the reasons why we still struggle with managing, because I've done quite a lot of talks at API-related conferences, and probably the most common question ever is, what about versioning? Right? Which is just another way as, well, how do I handle change? That's the question they're really asking. And the thing is, what we try and do is we try and apply what we've learned about change in libraries that we're building, from languages and runtime APIs, .NET applications, Python, Java, and we try and apply them to HTTP APIs. But HTTP APIs are different. They work differently. In language runtime APIs, compilers and runtimes define what is a breaking change. You know when you pull that new NuGet package down and you go to compile and the compiler goes, blah, it doesn't compile, here's an error, they made a breaking change. And even in the language side of things, we've introduced this notion of semantic versioning. We have this whole system of 1.2.3, and if the first number changes, it means it's breaking. But breaking as defined by whatever language you happen to be using or whatever runtime you're using. In the HTTP world, it's the consumer code that defines a breaking change, not the library provider, not the API provider. Because you could change the order of some properties that are in some JSON object, and 99% of clients, that's no problem. But if you ever go back a couple of years, if you've ever used a data contract serializer to deserialize a message, if you didn't have those properties in alphabetical order, then the data contract serializer would fail. It's the client code that decides whether a change in the message is going to cause a failure or not. In languages and runtime APIs, NuGet packages, gems, all those kind of distribution systems, the consumer chooses when they are going to get an update. In semantic version, it doesn't matter whether it's a patch release, that NuGet package doesn't automatically get deployed down to the consuming client application. The developer who created the client application who's consuming that library makes an explicit choice that they are going to go and use that updated package. In HTTP APIs, that's not necessarily the case. It's the provider of the library that chooses whether or not the consumer is going to get the change. Because you can go to your HTTP API and change the behavior, change the output, and those consumers will automatically get those changes. Whether it breaks them or not, well, that's a different question. And the provider doesn't really know that. It can guess, but it doesn't know for sure. So the concept of breaking change is really weird. It's very hard to define it for HTTP APIs. So I want to use some slightly different terminology to deal with the case where the provider decides if the consumer can choose. We're going to use two different words that are regularly used sort of interchangeably. I'm going to use versions to indicate that we're allowing the consumer to choose. This is where we create a V2 API, and the consumer is going to go to their client application, they're actually going to edit the code and change the URL, and now they're going to point to the V2. Whereas if I change my API with a revision, they will get those changes automatically. We want to say, we're making a change, but we don't want it to impact our consumers. And we have a gateway facade that allows us, if we have changes that happen on the back end, implementation changes, that we don't want to affect our consumer, then we can make changes in the gateway so that the back-end implementation changes don't change the contract that we've come up with our consumer. So we're going to look first at the developer portal, about communicating change to the end users. So kind of the role of a developer portal is it's a place for the developer to sign up, sign in, discover the APIs, try the APIs, build themselves a client, get an application using it, and then monitor the usage of the API with that application, and then report on that usage. Okay, sign up, sign in, why is that relevant for change? Well, the thing is, if nobody's using your API, it doesn't really matter whether it changes or not. And one of the things that the API community has learned is a good onboarding experience is critical to getting people to actually use your API and get adoption of your API. So these are the kind of things where these just come out of the box with API management, part of the developer portal. And we'll show you we'll go a little tour around the developer portal here. At least we'll try if I have network connectivity. Yes, I do have network connectivity. Okay. And you don't see anything because I have to extend my screen. Okay. I don't want to extend my screen, I want to duplicate my screen. Okay. So this is, you'll see in the URL, it's API management demo.portal.azureapi.net. This is just kind of the stock, the URL that's provided for the portal. You can CNAME that to your own custom domain. And here we have basically the stock vanilla, out of the box, bare bones portal. It is completely customizable because I'm signed in over here as an administrator. I get this little doohickey, and I can go and do all kinds of changing styles and changing templates of various pages. We use liquid templates to help you drive these pages. So we have customers that have done some really pretty end user sites out of this bare bones thing. So I wasn't about to start trying to make it pretty because I'm a developer and I'm a back-end developer, and you don't want me going anywhere near UI.
Right?
Okay, so here we have, I can say here are the, actually let me find a better one that actually has some parameters. I did actually choose a better one earlier. Okay, here you go. This one has a few more parameters. If I edit this, I can see it's got an ID that's supposed to be an integer in the template. And if I click over on query, I can see it's got a subscription key. I can optionally pass the subscription key for the API in the query string, or I can put it in the header. I don't want it in the query string. I'm going to just delete that parameter. And the subscription key goes in the header. And you can also describe the request and response. I'm running out of space here. So request is just a get, so there is no request. In the response, I can describe all the responses that I feel I need to document. So this one has representations. It claims that it's going to return either application.json or application XML from this particular one. These are just basically the default web API says these are the standard media types I'm going to support, and this is how it generates, Swashbuckle generates the Swagger to say these are the media types it produces and consumes. So this is pretty stock type of information. Now I'm looking at this description of this operation in a form-based UI, but that's not the only way I can do it. I can also click over here on this Open API specification view. Yeah, you can throw those changes away. And I get a different view. Oh, it's unhappy because I made changes. I get a different view of the API's description, but using this Open API description. Now, you may be used to seeing it in a JSON format. In this particular editor, it renders it in YAML format. Well, it's not complete YAML. It's just a subset of YAML so that it can switch backwards and forwards between JSON. You could actually type JSON in here directly, and it will work just fine because YAML is actually a subset of JSON as long as you don't do certain things that you shouldn't. So this gives us the list, the paths, and the operations, and the input parameters, and all of the information. And there's a duality to the editing of this. If I edit this, it changes in the forms. If I edit forms, it changes the other way around. Sorry, I panicked there for a moment. My notes is on my phone, and I thought a restart is coming soon to your phone. Oh, fun, fun, fun. Okay, well, let's make sure we get this finished before that restart happens. So we have this description, which is effectively our contract, right? We're talking about whether we should hide changes or display or tell users that this is going to come in a version and they're going to have to choose it. But what changes here should we put in revisions versus put in versions? Like if we add a parameter, is that a breaking change? If we remove one, is it? If we set something that was previously required to not required, there are many different things. Like I can just simply go here on this parameter and I can say, you are now required. I'll be making a very simple change. I can look at this operation and I can say, this operation is now deprecated. Oops. And if I actually was synced in the right place, all of a sudden in the docs, the Swagger UI, it gets that little deprecated tag. So there's an alternative way of, well, let's not remove this because my consumers might be calling that at the moment. Let's just mark it as deprecated. So sometimes there's alternative ways where we're not actually making a breaking change, but we're flagging it to warn a user that you should really stop using that. And then we can use our analytics to make sure that people aren't using it, and the ones that are, we can go hit them with a big stick and say, it's been 2 years, please stop using this. It's been marked as deprecated for this amount of time. The thing is, when you're defining these kind of specifications, you have to be careful about being over-specifying things. You'll notice in the responses to this particular request here, we return a 200. Often you'll see API documentation that also says, oh, and it returns a 400 and a 404 and a 500 and a 502, because they're trying to be completely inclusive of all possible cases. The problem is, in HTTP you can't be, because HTTP is a layered architecture, and between your client and the server there could be intermediaries, and they could shortcut that request, and all of a sudden you've got a status code that your API description says, oh, I'm never going to return that, but some intermediary does. So the client still has to handle it. So what the Open API spec really is not it's not what they call a closed world definition, it's an open world definition. It describes what is possible, it doesn't describe what isn't possible. So because a status code is not there, doesn't mean that you're never going to get it. Because a media type is not there, doesn't mean you're never going to get it. So if you take that open world perspective and build clients with that assumption that, okay, I'm going to get at least this stuff, but I might get other stuff, so I'll take care of those edge cases, and I won't completely crash. Maybe I have to gracefully degrade if I get some scenario that I don't know how to handle, but at least I'm not going to completely crash when you return a status code that I don't recognize. And in actual fact, if you're using JSON schema to model your the request bodies and response bodies, that's exactly how JSON schema works. When you describe a property, you have to explicitly opt in with the required array to say that this property is required. Otherwise, it is considered an optional property. Okay. So, when it comes to choosing whether these changes that you're going to make are actually going to be exposed as a version or a revision, i.e. pushed on your consumer or allow them to opt into it, you kind of need to make that decision as to what kind of changes are we going to take one approach versus the other approach. And you need to take those decisions and communicate them with your API consumers. I sort of wondered, you know, we have in services, we have this notion of a service level agreement. This says, I guarantee that you will get all responses within this amount of time and we'll be up 99.999% of the time. What about if we had a change level agreement that said this API, for these type of changes, I could push these on you anytime. Be prepared for them. But these other kinds of changes, like I will never remove an operation from you without incrementing the version. But I could add properties, I could add optional parameters. And by creating that description of this is how I plan to behave, then it allows consumers to build things in ways that aren't going to break. And all of a sudden, change becomes easier because everybody knows what is expected. So, I mentioned before about people using Swashbuckle as a way of generating the Open API, the Swagger document. It's common for people to do that. I'm starting to see a change in the API industry where people are starting to do more contract first, where the contract itself, the API script itself, becomes the source of truth. And that is what you change first, and that is what is the guiding thing when it comes to deciding what has changed. This notion of the change level agreement is a way of communicating how you're going to handle changes for your consumer. And I think if you take this open world contract approach, you'll end up with a more robust relationship with your consumers. Which brings us to the hiding side of things. The idea of being able to change things on the back end without changing your contract. And we're going to see some demos that show various different pieces of Azure infrastructure all working together and being used to deal with things that change at a different rate. At least that's the plan. Okay, so back at API Management, I'm going to go back into our favorite conference, API. and we'll look at just the speakers endpoint we were looking at before. And just like in the developer console, where developers can try out the API, you're building the API, and you're creating these policies that are potentially doing transforms on the API. It would really be handy if you could actually test them out here. And so we have the same kind of test runner in here, so that it allows me to send and go get the list of speakers that come back. And so here we have the response with the list of speakers that are going to be speaking at this particular conference. And we have another bonus feature, because we are an administrator, we get this trace that actually shows all the details of exactly what happened, what policies were run, how long all the policies took, and it gives you a complete view, and it's fabulous for debugging things that are happening whilst going through the gateway. And it's also great for support when customers go, this isn't working, can you please send us a trace? So in this case, actually what I wanted to show, back in the message, we have a bunch of headers here. You can see this is X ASP-version, something or other, X powered by ASP.NET. We really don't want to expose those details to our end consumer. So we can set policies very easily in API management just to remove those headers out of there. There's no point exposing information that might change and might confuse the end user, and plus it is also potentially a security thing if you're telling people exactly the version of tooling that you're using. So there's a variety of reasons why we might want to manipulate that message. But this API that all of these endpoints are hitting are a API app, right? File new Visual Studio, Web API, push it to app service, and that's an API app. We had a request for this. One of the endpoints is go get the days of when this conference is actually happening. Wouldn't it be nice if when we show the list of days that the conference is happening, we also show the weather forecast on that? Well, I don't have any tooling in place that's going to tell me the weather forecast, but I do know that there is another API that can do that for me. So we have this forecast endpoint that we've added in API management to our API. It's not added in the backend API app, but it is here in the API management description. And if I go and send that request off, it's going to come back and tell me, let's see, oh, it's 42 in Montreal at the moment. That's where I'm from. That's actually very warm for Montreal at this time. So how does that work? Well, if we go to the design of this particular operation, you'll see there's actually some policies in the inbound processing. And if I go into the editor up here, see a lovely little piece of XML that says, well, that incoming URL, I'm going to rewrite that and change it and point it somewhere else. I'm going to change the URL, the path, and the query string to look like this, and I'm going to set the backend service to point to the Dark Sky API net, Dark Sky API. And I have a key that we got, and that's stored in some global property and marked as a secret. And now, somebody can call my API, and I hard-coded the location, because the conference isn't going to change. The conference is here in Montreal, and the time of the event is this particular date. So I was able to simplify the front-end API, and then call the back-end API, the back-end to get all of that information, and pass it along to the consumer. The nice thing about this is it insulates my API consumer from changes when Dark Sky creates a V2 of their API and makes changes. I can intercept those changes and continue giving a consistent experience to my end users. So that's an example of using API management to call an external API in order to augment my existing API. I closed the wrong thing here, so let me go back in. Hit the wrong X. So the other thing about conferences is, if you've ever been, yes, question?
So can we automate the testing of these APIs?
yes, not directly with API management. We don't have a front-end component that calls the APIs, but there are a variety of tools that will call HTTP APIs and do effectively unit tests on them. There's no built-in testing infrastructure within API management itself.
Actually, we have some APIs, and we have written some integration tests to make sure it's working fine. So if we onboard our APIs to here, so I was thinking how we can run it before we deploy a new version or something of a different environment, something like that.
But you could definitely take the existing integration tests that are hitting your existing API and just redirect them and point them to API management, and API management will call your backend. But if everything's set up so you're just doing straight pass-through, and you're only using things like caching and throttling in API management, then, and you're not doing any transformations, then your test should continue to run. Because by default, we are a transparent proxy, right? Other than adding security and things, but your test should continue to run passing through us. Yes?
How does your billing work? So am I right to check to you every time that I use this API and I get my API key through you, or do I actually have to go to the provider and all of that stuff goes through them and I pass you the key that I got from them, or how does that interaction work?
Well, I think you mentioned a variety of different customers there. So we as an Azure API Management team, we're selling a service to people who are producing APIs. That is done on a monthly subscription basis. And then those people who are producing APIs, they may be internal to a big organization, or they themselves may be then reselling those APIs to third-party developers. Which is why we have this notion of products, where we're allowed to, for example, you can create different products with different throttling levels. So you could have kind of the starter package, or the free demo trial, which only has a very limited amount of throttling. And then we have the higher level products, and then you could have an unlimited, right? You have an enterprise version. So we allow you to control the traffic and the usage of your APIs, so then you become our customer, and you would then have other customers that you would then bill for the usage of your APIs. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
A related question.
Yes?
That begs the question is, if I'm selling it to other developers, and I'm managing API keys that are unique to other developers, is that feature supported here, or is that something I'll have to do on my own?
No, we provide a mechanism for managing subscription keys. And so developers can sign in to use your API, and they are provided subscription keys that then give them access to them. And there are multiple ones, and you can regenerate them, and they can be cancelled if for example, they get stolen. It's the standard mechanisms for dealing with shared secrets.
How do I know on my service who called my API? Is that can that be passed forward? In other words, is there a means of taking that subscription key and saying, either passing the subscription key back or some sort of indicator that says, this is user ID 1,
Yeah,
2, 3, 4.
the subscription keys are associated to a particular user account in the portal.
And that subscription key gets passed all the way back to the header or something to my API?
He wants you down in the.
Oh, you
my
can.
API so I know who called it, so I can log it.
Let me, Vlad is our PM. Does it go by default to the back
Yes,
end?
it goes by default, but you can also, we also provide you with the context information, so you can, instead of passing on key, you can pass on username or email or whatever, so to your back end.
Very interesting. Okay. Is that in a header?
You can put it in the header, in the body, wherever you want to put it. You know, put it on.
All right, thanks. I know that was a big digression.
No, that's fine. Yes.
So one short question. So as I understand, when you invoke some API from here, it calls a real service, right?
Yes, it calls you call our service, and we call your service.
Yes. So what if data is something that I cannot show to developers? So should I have separate service only for that?
Data, what kind of, you're saying there's data in the back end?
Yeah.
and you don't want to expose that on the front end.
Well, I mean, I cannot show production data to developers. Let's say it's special.
Oh, I see. Okay, sure. Yeah. You can. One of the things that, because we have these policies that sit in this middle tier, and you can set the back end, just as I set that dark sky API, you can do clever things that say, well, if this user who's using it is a member of this group, our internal developer team, then change the backend service to point to our internal demo data versus going to back live data. So you can do those kind of conditional statements. We have both policies that are conditional blocks, and you can also do embedded C# expressions to do all that kind of stuff. But yes, you can definitely switch which backend you point to depending on who the user is. Yes?
One question in regard to the security of the API. Can I integrate it with other Azure programs like Active Directory to authenticate the users?
Yes. We have a policy for validating job tokens, and in the validation, you basically just get in the policy, you simply point to the OpenID configuration of Azure AD, and we'll get all the information from Azure, and when the end consumer application that has already authenticated itself with Azure has that token and it passes the job token through us, we can go and look at that job token and validate it and pull out claims from it.
Okay.
And is it policies based on this?
Yep. Yeah, you can do anything you want based on those claims, sure. Okay, so we looked at the dark sky external third-party API. Let's quickly look at another API here. So you're doing a conference and you get all these proposals come in from some speaker and you're like, who is this person? Have they ever spoke before? We want to know something about this person. So I created this endpoint, and we're going to test this endpoint here, which goes, okay, but there's one thing that I really missed saying about AutoRest. It doesn't just generate C#, right? It generates like a bazillion different languages. No, it doesn't generate server-side stuff.
There's record jamming, but it only generates core server, which makes it a little difficult, but if you're using framework.net.
Yeah. I don't know of any
for a server. It generates client side.
Well, Swagger Code Gen generates server stuff.
It
right?
does, but
only core?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I was a little surprised, but
see, I played around with a tool that did it differently. I wrote a tool that changed the routing in Web API, and instead of using attribute routing or the pattern routing, I just load the Swagger doc in, and I annotate the Swagger doc and say, if this operation comes in, hit this controller. If this operation comes in, hit this controller. So the routing derives directly from the Swagger doc.
yeah, what we're trying to do is get as close as possible to sort of a symmetric thing where anything in code goes up and you can pull it out of the Swagger doc on the site and you can afford that. But then things that are not available in Swagger or that are not available in the Swashbuckle, we'd like to add in, and it would be great if we could have some sort of bi-directional way of like merging those things and version controlling them.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the problem is when you're generating so many artifacts, which is why I took this, because I got the idea from Swagger Inflector, which is a Java product that does the same thing. It just simply uses the Swagger definition as the metadata to drive the routing. So you don't need to do any code gen, you just need a way of being able to attach the Swagger operation to the controller. And you can do that either way, right? You can either put the controller name in the Swagger doc as an X dash, or you could put an attribute on the controller that says this belongs to this operation. And changing the routing in Web API is fairly easy to do. So it wasn't a big deal. My biggest problem was I couldn't find any really good Swagger parsers in C#. The only one is the one in Swashbuckle, and that was a very simplistic one. So I've been writing one for OpenAPI v3, which will hopefully also support v2. So if I have that Swagger parser, it will allow me to go back and do some more work on the routing mechanism.
Is that on GitHub?
Yeah, it's all on them.
Okay. And I guess sort of related, it seems like Swashbuckle, of course, that's not your component, but it seems to rely strictly on the XML docs feature of C# for generating stuff, so that's where a lot of the stuff doesn't match.
Yeah. Well, again, because does it pull that XML docs into the Swagger?
Yeah, there's what you can do is, as long as you've written your XML docs, there's something in the Swagger config that allows it to suck that stuff in, so you can get the name, descriptions for your properties and so forth. So you can get quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just generated from the C# code, but you hit a wall, and then there's a bunch of other stuff you'd like written pretty.
No, it's and he's been busy, Richard's been busy working on the core version of Swashbuckle, right? So not a lot of new features.
As a matter of fact, he said, I'm not touching the old stuff anymore.
Thank you. And so progress goes on, right?
Yeah.